I don't want to talk about you. I want to talk about your career. I really want to talk about the spider clone thing. Well, I had several people from that era of Spider-Man on already. And one thing that I got out of all of them, Danny Fingeroth, who else? Nuts. That my brain stopped working. I've been up since 4 this morning. I work very early in the morning. But
I know the problem.
Oh, yeah. So one thing out of all the people I've talked about that have worked with you and know you, I've never heard a negative thing about you. Like they shouting from the rooftops, oh my gosh, Tom DeFalco is the greatest dude ever. So
yeah, every time they say a compliment, it costs me $5. So I wish they would just shut their damn mouths.
All right, everybody, you're hearing the voice of Tom DeFalco. Tom DeFalco has been in the comics industry for decades. And not only has he created some of your favorite characters, but he's edited some of your favorite books and had a hand in developing some of the most massive cartoons that eventually turned into big, giant blockbuster films and robots with balls. So, Tom DeFalco, how you doing, man?
So far, so good.
Just briefly, when you were in the meeting to discuss the Japanese toy that eventually became Transformers, did you ever conceive of the idea that it would eventually be a multi-million-dollar picture and they would have big giant robot balls on the screen?
No, nothing even close to that. I'll give you secrets behind comics, a very boring story. But I think that's why you want me on to tell my boring stories. So we had worked with Hasbro on G.I. Joe, and that ended up to be a very nice success for everybody. And they got in touch with us, and they said, we have another project for you. And they showed up. The guys from Hasbro, they were great guys. It was like a big family reunion. But this time they showed up with a lawyer because they needed us to sign these non-disclosure agreements. So naturally, they showed up with our lawyer. We had to call down. They showed up with their lawyer. We had to call down our lawyer, and the two lawyers had to decide the non-disclosure agreement. And meanwhile, the rest of us, we were hanging out, having a grand old time, catching up on gossip, and just enjoying each other's company. Because, like I said, it's all family week. Finally, the lawyers get together. They come up with a non-disclosure agreement that both lawyers can sign off on, which is very rare. You'll find something that both lawyers can sign off on. We all sign our papers. They're all gathered together, and then they say, we want to show you these toys, and they put out a couple of the Transformers on the table. And when they put them on the table, I happen to be sitting across from Larry Hama. And I look up at Larry Hama, and he looks at me, and we smile at each other. And we turn to the table and said, we're going to be back in 5 minutes. I said, wait a minute, we're in the middle of a meeting. We're going to be right back. So Larry and I get out of the meeting, and we go down the hall. We're both laughing. He runs to his office. I run to my office. We come back, and he lays out 3 or 4 of the Japanese Transformers, and I lay out a different 3 or 4. And the guys from Hasbro look at him and go, wait a minute, where did you get those things? I said, well, we bought them at this comic book store called Forbidden Planet, local store in New York City. And you can't have them. This is top secret. I said, well, they're selling them to anybody who wants them. And then our lawyer said, wait a minute, if they're selling it to people, those non-disclosure agreements can't have any, I forget the legal term. So the guy from Hasbro, a great guy by the name of Bob Perupas, who we work with at GRs, give me all the forms. And then our lawyer say, no, you can't give him the forms. He says, just give them to me. And he gets all the forms and he starts ripping them in half. He said, heck with all this legal mumbo jumbo. Let's just sit down and talk. Like I said, a boring story, secrets behind comics.
That's amazing, though. And the fact that you kind of have taken part, and if not completely participated, at least been a fly on a wall for so much of this stuff is mind-boggling to me, especially now today. You turn on TV and boom, there's a property that you were involved with in some way, shape, or form.
Well,
so
yeah, my my participation in Transformers was, minuscule. Bob, he's the guy that did, like 99% of the Transformers, just like G.I. Joe, Larry Hama, maybe 95%. Archie Goodwin came up with Cobra Command, but those are the guys that really did the work. I just got the opportunity to sit back and applaud them.
That's amazing. So, judging by your accent, I think you grew up in rural Georgia on a peanut farm. So, tell me how you got into comics in the first place. What was it? What was the spark that hit Tom DeFalco and went, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do?
I was always interested in comics. I started reading comic strips, and then I would cut out the comic strips from my father's newspaper. Hopefully, I'd wait till after he read it. And
I've got in trouble for that.
Held on to them. Somewhere along the line, one of my cousin Johnny, gave me a Batman comic that scared the hell out of me. I was maybe 9-10 years old. This Batman comic, this creature, really scared me. But I loved the medium. And then I discovered you can actually buy comic books in the local candy store. And then from then on, I was hooked. I guess I was kind of outgrowing comic books around the time that I discovered Fantastic Four, number 3 and 4. And those two comic books, I always say, changed my life because I fell in love with the medium all over again. And it's a love that has never gone away. I always knew that I wanted to be some kind of writer. Kind of cursed that way from grade school on. And after I got out of college, I had done some writing for newspapers, for some magazines, sold a couple of short stories, that sort of thing. But I was hoping that someday I could do a comic strip. And I sent out resumes to the different comic book companies, hoping that somebody would hire me. I didn't realize how stupid that idea was. But Archie Comics saw my resume and they called me up and they offered me a job. So I owe my career to a gentleman by the name of Michael Silberkleit, who was the business manager who was in charge of the business stuff at Archie. I forget what his actual title was. And he told Richard Goldwater, who was the editor in charge of the creative stuff. And Richard put me in touch with Victor Gorlick.
Oh, wow.
Who was, my boss for a lot of years. Victor taught me, everything I know. Not everything he knew, but everything I know.
He sounds like, every time I've heard him in interview, he sounded as if he was completely and totally sold on Archie. He was just in love with the job. He loved what he did. And he really had a lot of good energy.
He totally loved the Archie characters. He loved the material he was doing. He had very little interest in any other kinds of comics, which worked because he was doing Archie comics.
Yeah.
And yeah, he had a boundless enthusiasm, a love of the medium, a love of the craft. Like I say, he taught me so much. I still hear his words in the back of my ear, constantly, and he was just one of these great people that it was a privilege to know. He passed away a couple of years ago, and I don't know if Archie has ever recovered, if the industry will ever recover. Yeah. We're losing a lot of our giants as time goes on.
Yeah, yeah. Is there anything now that kind of gives you hope for the comics industry, especially as tumultuous as it has been even over the past week? What with the whole Diamond thing and Penguin Random House. What is it? Penguin? Yeah.
I am, like everybody else, I fear for the industry on a regular basis. And then I remember that I've been around for at least, and maybe 3 or 4 times where the industry looked like it faced, extinction. That basically had a few months to go, and then things always happened, and it just keeps on going. I think the medium is such a strong medium. It's been with us since caveman times. So words and pictures. It'll keep on going. Whether or not superheroes will keep on going, who knows? Who cares? Well, I shouldn't say. I enjoy superheroes. I enjoy all of it. But my love is more towards the craft and the medium itself, as opposed to individual characters. When I'm writing them, I fall in love with, and the characters that I've been privileged to write. I just loved every moment I got to spend with them. Archie, Spider-Man, Spider-Girl, Thor, whichever character I got to have my hands on it. And I did a whole bunch of other stories that had nothing to do with superheroes in comics, horror stories and mysteries and blah 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 blah. I realized that if I can hang out till 2022, that'll be 50 years in the industry. Yikes!
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Because I joined in 72.
Oh wow! So you got into the comics industry through Archie, and then you went to DC. Am I correct?
I did some work for Charlton. Did a lot of work for Charlton. A couple of stories for, I think it was Gold Key, and then eventually got to DC.
So, and that was all working as a writer, or what was your positions at Carlton and Gold Key?
Oh, those were just as a freelance writer.
When did you first start getting into the editing side? And I really want to know, eventually, I guess your heart is in writing.
Yeah, that's what I always wanted to do. I got a job in the production. Like I said, Archie Comics hired me. They hired me in their production editorial department. And I was there, and my goal was to learn how to write, learn how to write comics. And I had an incredible teacher, a guy by the name of Frank Doyle, who helped me out a lot. And as time went on, I started to do some writing for Archie, and started to do more writing for Archie, and more writing outside of Archie and outside of comics and stuff like that. And I started to cut down the number of days I was working at Archie. I think at the end I was working either 2 or 3 days a week. I was editing the digest books and stuff like that. And then at a certain point, I was doing some freelance work for Marvel, and Jim Shooter offered me a writing contract at Marvel. And I thought, wow, and it was, it was a very nice contract, nice chance to do, superheroes and stuff like that. And I thought, maybe I should, take him up on that. So I, with tears in my eyes, I left Archie Comics and became an exclusive writer, a comic book writer for Archie. And, I was there, freelance writing for them for about a year or so. And then Jim Shooter came to me and said, listen, I'm reorganizing the editorial department. I'd like you to come on staff as an editor. And I said to him, Jim, I haven't worked a full-time job in a lot of years. I don't even know if I can do it. And Jim said to me, well, I really need the help, and I'd really like you, to come on. And if it doesn't work out, it's a temporary job, just at least till I get it organized. So you come on for a few months. If it doesn't work out, you can you can go back to full-time writing. So I thought, yeah, that's fair. And I hooked on to editorial, my temporary job, and it ended up to be, instead of 6 months, closer to 20 years.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
And in the course of that, I eventually became executive editor and then, to my surprise, editor-in-chief. None of those were things that I was aiming for. My whole goal was to get back to full-time writing.
So did your role as an editor kind of give you more insight into your writing because you had to look at it through a more critical lens?
That's a chicken or an egg kind of thing. Did my writing help my editing? I'm sure it did. Did my editing help my writing? I'm sure it did. Talking to other writers as an editor, I'm sure that, I'm sure I could, talk to other writers easier because I was a writer. And I think I could, understand where they were coming from a lot of times. And I got to work with a lot of writers, certain guys that were very close to me in terms of style and approach, and certain guys that were completely alien to me in terms of style and approach. I often said to Mark DeMattis, who's a good friend of mine, and this great writer that I admired a lot, and so does a lot of other people, that Mark's style of writing and my style of writing, we don't belong in the same universe together. But I can appreciate his stuff, and he can appreciate my stuff. Sadly, he's much better than I am, and that annoys the hell out of me.
Don't sell yourself short. What is it about your styles that are so different?
He takes a much more literary approach, and he's approaching it from the focus, the thematic focus, dealing with big philosophical ideas. And I approach it from the characters. I want the characters to be real people, and I want the stories to affect you on an emotional basis. I think that's the closest I can say as terms of a difference. His has more, his stories have many more ideas in them. Sometimes my stories have just the theme and no ideas whatsoever, but a lot of emotion.
To me, that's what Marvel is, though, is the characters, just having solid characters that you can then put into a larger world and make stories around them and put them in stories.
I totally agree. I think that when Ron Frenz and I first started working together, which was on Amazing Spider-Man, we would spend hours and hours on the phone talking about Peter Parker. And a lot of times the story would be like a secondary thing, because once we knew how intimately, had an intimate understanding of Peter Parker, we knew that if this happens, that, that's how he's going to react. And it's always been the same for us. We're talking about, Thor and his relationship with his father, his relationship with this, Eric Masterson, his relationship with his son, his relationship with his buddy Hercules,
That was my introduction to Thor, by the way, the Thunderstrike and all that. And that really blew my mind as a kid.
Good. We wanted to create a great roller coaster ride, and I'm glad it did. It had that effect, because we were constantly, trying our best to, keep twisting and turning and coming up with new ideas and that sort of stuff. And so many times we thought, everybody's going to know where we're going with this one. And we're lucky because the people knew where we were headed. They kept their mouths shut.
That's awesome. I have a question specifically you've had a few projects that in the onset there was blowback from fans, and like the black costume with Spider-Man, or maybe even Eric Masterson, stuff like that. How do you deal with that negative blowback? Do you just put your head down and keep working, or do you try to anticipate that in the onset? How do you handle people not understanding where you're going? Because it all worked out in the end. You know, you look at Spider-Man now, and that black costume, of course, brought Venom and all that, and people love it. So it's all part of the process, but you don't know that when you're in the midst of getting hate mail.
Well, you know, you never know how anybody's going to actually react to anything until the comic book is actually in print. You know, comic book fans, you know, this will get me in trouble, but comic book fans are a cowardly and suspicious lot, superstitious lot. You know, they are afraid of what they perceive to be permanent change. The second controversy, big controversy it was the black costume. When people heard that we were going to change Spider-Man's costume, we got a ton of negative mail about it. Everybody's swearing that they were going to, you know, they were going to stop buying Spider-Man. They were going to stop buying the Marvel comic books. You know, this is the end, you know, no more. And, you know, and they kept swearing that would happen up until the book actually came out. And then they suddenly changed their tune, saying that if we switch back costumes, they would give up reading Spider-Man. They love the black costume, blah, 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 blah. And like I say, that was the second big controversy I was involved in. The first one, we were doing a Spider-Man annual. I forget what number, what issue it was. And Mark Grunwald was my assistant. And I wanted to do feature pages. I have a main story and some feature pages, that sort of stuff. Kind of like annuals when I was a kid, where you had a lot more stuff going on. And, you know, Mark said, hey, I got this idea for a 2-page thing where Spider-Man is going to figure out, you know, he's going to rate characters according to their power level. And he, you know, basically pitched me the idea, and I thought, hey, that sounds like fun. Okay, yeah, let's do it. So I don't remember. I know Mark wrote it. I think he penciled it. I think maybe Bob Layton inked it. I really don't remember at this stage. But in those days, before you sent the book out, you had to send it up, you know, to Jim Shooter to look at it before it would come out. So, you know, we were getting the feature pages done. We send it into the production department to get the logos printed and stuff. And suddenly half of the bullpen and half the writers and artists who were in the office kept coming into my office complaining about, no, this character doesn't belong here. This one belongs here. This guy's not on the third level. He's on the second level. How dare you put my character, you know, in the fourth level? He's definitely a top tier guy. And all these guys are arguing about where all the characters. And then finally Jim Shooter comes in. Oh, wait a minute, I got to talk to you. This is all wrong. And I grabbed the 2 pages and said, listen, everybody's got an opinion, but this is Spider-Man's opinion. Your opinion doesn't count. Nobody's opinion counts. Everybody's arguing about all the characters. We're not going to come to a consensus. We're going to send it out as is. And then we got a pile of mail. Every fan who read it had a different opinion. And you know, the mailroom was not happy with me because they got so much mail. And that was the most mail we got up until the black costume was coming out. But, you know, anytime you did anything, you know, everybody would react. Everybody would be hysterical, and then they would calm down.
I got to tell Ron Mars about my experience in my middle school lunchroom during the Marvel versus DC comics and how upset all my friends were about the outcome of the Wolverine Lobo fight. So,
you know, who won? It should have been Wolverine.
I think it was, but
okay, that makes sense.
My argument was that Lobo was such a cartoon character that, you can't beat Bugs Bunny because the law of physics doesn't really apply. But again, I'm a grown man talking about a comic book character in a book that was written for children. So,
Well, when a comic book is well done, it sucks you in.
Oh, yes.
And, one of the things that Ron Friends and I are very proud of is the fact that most of the time, and that's like 99.999% of the time, when people wrote in letters, back in the days when people would write letters about our stuff, all they talked about was the characters. They never discussed the writing. They never discussed the artwork. They were discussing the characters. They didn't like this. That happened to this character. They liked that happened to the characters, and they were focused on the characters, which to me meant we were doing our job correctly. I've told, Ron and I believe that when the creative people are doing their jobs, at their best level, they are invisible. If you can recognize a writing style or that sort of stuff, we're screwing up somehow.
Is that something that you've had to kind of check yourself for as a writer?
No. I do the best I can to submerge myself into the characters.
When you are, because I've noticed you've done like a few fill-ins here and there for people. When you do that, do you try and study what that person is doing and how that characterization is prior to your jumping in, or do you just try to write a solid story?
That I try. Whenever I was doing a fill-in, I would try to read the previous 5 issues, at least the previous 5 issues, just to get a sense of the rhythm of the way the character was speaking, and try to make it fit in as seamlessly as possible.
That's awesome. So you were kind of instrumental in the Clone Saga happening. I talked to Terry Cavanaugh and Howard Mackey and Danny Fingeroff, and they couldn't have said any more nice things about you. They were over the moon about you as a person, thought you were a great guy to work with. And I just want to know, like, how was your experience on those books, and how was it a hard sell for you, or was it something that you were like, okay, this sounds cool, let's do this?
Oh, it was a complete hard sell for me. Danny had told me their plan, that we're going to introduce the clone and he's the real guy, and I said that's ridiculous, and I said no, we're not going to do that. And he said, well, the guys are very excited about it. And I said, well, I still don't think it's a good idea. And then he said, well, come to the meeting tomorrow and tell the guys what you think. And I went to the meeting, and they, these guys, they all knew me. If I was one thing, it was remarkably consistent, which I think as editor-in-chief, you must be consistent. So these guys all knew how I was going to react to this thing before I showed up. And they took it as their job to convince me to make this Clone Saga work. And they would explaining to me in very passionate ways why they thought this would be a great thing to do. And I remember sitting there watching the passion that these guys, each of them had. Sal Buscema had been in the industry for 50 years by that time, talking about how much, he thought this would really, really turbocharge the Spider-Man series and everything else like that. And I thought, wow, if these guys are that passionate, the readers are going to be even more passionate. And that's what we want. We want the readers to be affected by the stories. So I said to him, okay, well, we got to figure out what we're going to do with Peter Parker. And he said, well, he and Mary Jane, go off together. And I said, but why would they go off? Why would they go off? They have to have a reason for going off. And I think I accidentally stumbled. I said they needed reason, like Mary Jane is pregnant, and when I said that, Mark DeManus and Howard Mackey smacked hands with each other because they had a bet that I would come up with the thing that would help them give them the end to the story. So they collected their bet, and and then later on, I said to Danny Fingeroth, I called him up on the side. I said, "Okay, all right, here's the basic story that you have. Ben comes on the scene. We didn't know he was going to be, called Ben at the time. We find out that the clone is the real guy. The clone takes over. Peter and Mary Jane go off to live happily ever after. Something goes wrong. Peter and Mary Jane have to come back. Peter has to, save the clone. Wait a minute, we got it wrong. Peter is the real guy. The clone is the clone. And at the end of this, the plan was we have the Amazing Spider-Man, Peter, Mary Jane, and their baby, because Spider-Man is all about responsibility. What is a greater responsibility than having children? So we're adding more responsibilities on Peter's back. So we have a married family, Peter Parker, and then we have a, for lack of a better term, single Peter Parker, the Ben Reilly character. So those who want single Spider-Man stories, we got that. Although we call the book The Scarlet Spider. Those who want a married one, we got that. Called Amazing Spider-Man. It's the trick we had done with, Iron Man and War Machine, Thor and Thunderstrike. Just expanding, the different, story structures.
I remember
that was our plan.
I remember being on. I'm sorry. I remember being on that roller coaster during the Clone Saga and just being really affected with, thinking about what Peter was going through and stuff, because, I was 14. So yeah, that kind of hit hard, and it brought up a bunch of stuff that I had not really encountered before. So
it was supposed to hit hard. It was a whole question of, who am I? What am I? Where's my place in the world? There were hard themes, not the kind of themes you expect in comic books. We were trying to, deal with these things, in an adult way, but for children. I used to say that our audience at that time was 16-year-olds of all ages, both people who, were not yet 16, but dreamed of the day when they could be that magical age of 16, and people who were older than 16 that look back on that day with fondness.
That's a great way to put it, actually.
So we were just trying to, we did have important themes, but we were also trying to entertain. That we wanted a lot of twists and turns, a big roller coaster ride. We were hoping that nobody could see what was coming, and actually, we didn't see certain things that were coming. One of the things we didn't see is around that, in October of that year, Marvel decided to make a change, and they fired me as editor-in-chief. Probably a wise decision on their part. And, that, kind of changed the direction of things. Then later on, Marvel bought its own distributor. And when Marvel bought its own distributor, they almost destroyed the comic book industry. Sales fell like 60%. Half the comic book stores went out of business. It was just a total disaster. But only 2 lines of comic books started to recover. The X line and the Spider line. And the Spider line was because of the Clone Saga. And because the Clone Saga was selling, the powers that be did not want it to end. That Clone Saga should have been over. Think about, I don't remember.
I think Kavanaugh said, like 4 months or like 12 issues or something like that.
Something like that. Maximum. Our original plan was maximum clonage would have been the thing that tied everything up, and instead, halfway through it, we were instructed that you can't tie anything up. we have to keep on going. The Clone Saga, like too many screaming TV shows, the Clone Saga was stretched out a little too long. At least I thought it was stretched out a little too long. You know, years later, Howard Mackey and I did this limited series called The Real Clone Saga or something like that. I don't remember that, the actual title. Todd Knock drew it. And I had to go back and reread the entire Clone Saga to remember everything. And I was surprised at how good so many of the stories were, which, you know, kind of surprised me. Here's something that you guys didn't know about me. I don't reread my stuff after it's in print. I've always warned Ron Friends not to look at the printed comic. I've said the printed comic can only depress you because you'll see a mistake you made, you'll see a mistake somebody else made. You'll look at something and say, "Whoa, that's pretty good," or "Wow, that's terrible." Well, you know, all it can do is depress you. Keep moving forward.
I have a question kind of related to that. After you're done on a run, so like, you know, Thor, Spider-Man, do you keep up with those characters, or is it something like is it hard to watch what other people do to them?
It's impossible to watch what other people do to them. I do not keep up with them. When I got off of Spider-Man, I didn't look at Spider-Man for about 2 or 3 years. And that's a character I love. When I got off of Thor, to be honest, I've never gone back to reading Thor on a regular basis. Maybe an issue here or there. Same thing with Fantastic Four. I'm sure someday they're going to bring back Spider-Girl. And, you know, enough years have passed, but I don't know if I'm going to even bother to look at that stuff. And I think I do it for a number of reasons. You know, one, the characters become alive. If you're doing it right, the characters become alive to you, and you hear their voices in your head. And nobody else quite gets the cadence down the way you had it. So if you're reading another writer's, interpretation of the character, it doesn't sound right because you're too personally involved. And that's being unfair to the writer after you. I know a lot of the writers that followed me, and they're terrific. They're great writers. But because I was so deeply involved with the characters, I wouldn't have the right, I wouldn't be reading the stuff objectively as a reader. I'd be comparing it to my own stuff, which I think is just blatantly unfair. So I'd rather not do it.
When you're moving on from one project to another, is it hard to get the previous project, the characters out of your head, or is it just starting with a clean slate?
Well, the characters stay in your head for a long time afterwards. But I've always been juggling, a bunch of different projects. I have a low attention span, so I've got to keep busy. So, I'd be doing just a whole bunch of different things, a humor project here, a horror project there, a murder mystery here, so I've been, always juggling different things. And, when something goes away, something always replaces it quickly enough that I don't worry about, characters' voices.
I hear you. So because you've been in so many different genres and mediums, is there anything that you haven't had the opportunity to work with that you want to get a chance to try?
Not really. Not really. I've been a lucky guy. I managed to, to find the things I love. I got a chance to spend a lot of time with the things I love. Projects that I didn't love so much, I never went back.
I hear you. Is there anything that you would drop everything right now to return to, like a character that you would want to go back and write?
Yeah, I don't know. I spent the last 30 in the comic book field, that the time with Spider-Girl and the MC2 universe and that sort of stuff. I really enjoyed those characters a lot. I think that, today, if they were going to bring back Spider-Girl, they would probably bring in, a woman writer or a woman artist or that sort of thing, and probably give it a much more, a grounded thing than I did, because I was, mainly playing a soap opera. But yeah, no, I'm more hooked on the medium. I've always had a thing for Captain America, but the kind of Captain America stories that I would like to do, I don't know if they're in vogue anymore. They'd be, hoo-ha action, much closer to the movies than they are, to the philosophical Captain America stuff that people are doing now.
I hear you.
That's not the. What? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. There's always going to be a call for people wanting that, though. The hoo-ha action that you call it. People are always going to want that. So it's never going to go out.
Well, who knows? The audience is constantly changing. The tastes are constantly changing. When I was doing comic books, like I said, it was 16-year-olds of all ages. These days, I think they're 30-year-olds of all ages. I'm not exactly sure where the audience is. I flip through a lot of comic books and I see a lot of heads talking. And to me, that's a radio script. And I wrote radio scripts for a while, and I enjoyed doing radio scripts, but I figure, you write a radio script for radio. For comic books, hoo-ha action. Those are the kind of stories that I like. I like things that move along quickly. Ron Friends and I realized that with our attention span, 3 issues is about as far as we can go on a story. And then we got to change the scene. We got to do a different kind of villain. We got to do something else, because otherwise we're getting bored.
Is that why you have so many people? So sorry, not people, but I guess people, characters that are attributed to you, because it seems like you introduce so many people into comics as a whole, like so many, like the New Warriors, Night Thrasher, Benjamin Richards Parker, Puma, Henry Pym Jr., Hope Pym. I'm just going down the list. Oh my gosh, dude, you have an encyclopedia of people that you created.
I look back and when Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, they were coming out with Fantastic Four. Every month they'd introduce a new villain. And I thought, well, that's what we're supposed to be doing. But, that the company is paying us to be creative. So let's create, let's come up with new things, new situations, new characters, I like to, I'm supposed to be a creative guy. I want to create.
So as a writer and also as an editor, what have you learned about working with different personalities? Like, is there anything that helped you to navigate the different styles and different personalities that you would come across? Because it seems to me that, especially in editing, learning how to communicate to different types of people is kind of like a key thing.
It is very key. The secret, in my day, the editor got to hire and fire everybody. It's more like being the producer, the producer or the director of a movie. And you, as an editor, you surrounded yourself with people who all had the same goal. And the goal was to produce the best comic book story we could. And, I think these days, I've run across guys that talk about their brand and their ego and all that other stuff. And I'm thinking, forget about your ego. you check it at the door, because the story is the most important thing that you're doing. And if there's any way to make the story better, I've never seen a writer, when you point something out to them saying, this doesn't quite work. I know what you're trying to say, but it's just not, you're not getting there. Maybe if you did this, maybe if you did that. I see, at least the people I always surrounded myself with, they would all, go that extra distance. Because, the story is boss. One editor, I think it was Denny O'Neill, had a sign on his door, on his wall saying, the job is boss. I always thought that was the most important thing that lesson that I ever learned. It's, this story that we're doing, we've got to, there is nothing we can't do to make this better. We've got to do everything we can to make this better, because the readers deserve to get the best story we can produce in the time we have to produce it. Because, we're asking readers for their money, and even more important, their time. Money, they can always get other money, but once they waste their time on our story, they can never get that back. So we damn well better be worth their time and their money. Because, we have a responsibility to our readers. That's why I think every comic book you pick up should be a complete unit of entertainment, because you don't know if you're ever going to get the next issue. I'm standing on a soapbox now, ain't I?
No, stand on that soapbox. I want to hear it. You just said you don't know when you're going to get the next issue, which brings me to a question from a listener, because you kind of went through a period with Spider-Girl where it was, you had like 6 issues and then they'd extend it, and then it kept going like that for a while. How did you deal with that? And did you buy stock in Tums? Because it sounds like that would have been an important part of having a title like that.
We just treated every issue as if it would be our last. So we wanted to do the best job we could do. And a number of issues we were told would be our last. I've often said to readers, go back, and anytime you see the story ends on a full page shot of Spider-Girl, that's because we thought it was going to be the last issue.
Oh my gosh.
There was actually a time, trying to remember what issue number it was. I think it was issue somewhere around 59, issue 60, something like that. That they told me definitely this time is going to be the last issue. There's no hope for a reprieve. And so we, finished up the issue. And then I went into Marvel to drop off the last script. And I, checked around. I said, hey, you guys got any more work for me? Oh, well, we'll see what we can do. We'll see what we can do, which to me meant no. So I figured, okay, probably last time I'm going to be in Marvel. So I walked around. I said goodbye to everybody. I walked out the door. I thought, okay, this part of my life is over. And about a week later, on April Fool's Day, April 1st, they called me up and said, Spider-Girl got uncanceled again. We need a plot by the end of the week.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, really? Well, April Fool's, and I hung up on the editor. And he called me back. And, he ended up calling me a few times. And I kept thinking, guys, I've been doing these kind of gigs on people for 30 years. And then about 7:30 at night, I got a call from Tom Brevoort, who I could tell is exhausted. And he says to me, 7:30 at night, you're the last person I really want to be talking to on the phone. Just want to get out of here and go home to my kids. And I said, well, why don't you, Tom? He said, because you won't believe that Spider-Girl isn't canceled. It's not canceled, and we need a plot in 2 days. Can you come up with something in 2 days? And I said, sure. And he said, I'm going to have to put down some solicitation. Can you come up with something for me? I said, okay, tell him the story is called Marked for Death, because that's what this book was. And I'll come up with a murder mystery. And then we went for another, I think, 70, 80 issues after that.
Oh my God. That is fantastic.
What was going on is, here's a secret behind comic, the direct market. Sales in the direct market only go down. They just go down. Guys figure out, the first issue is coming. Okay, I'm going to order 100 copies of the first issue. I'm going to order 50 copies of the second issue and 25 copies of the third issue. And that's what they do. And hopefully, if the first issue sells out, some of these guys, you hope that they're smart enough to know that they should increase the sales for the third issue. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes books are canceled before the first issue comes out because they're already cutting their sales, the dealers. So the direct sales guys, they look at a title, they see where it's selling, and they can pretty accurately figure out when the title has to be canceled. And this works for almost every comic book except Spider-Girl. They would look at it and say, in 10 issues, this book will be underwater. We have to cancel it. Okay. Except 10 issues later, they go back and they look at the sales, and the sales have gone up on Spider-Girl. Sales don't go up on direct only comic books in the direct market. And yet it did. So Spider-Girl was constantly defying all sorts of expectations. People often said, you had a book that was on the verge of cancellation for years. No, it was not on the verge. The sales department predicted that it would be on the verge, but it never got to the verge. At one point, they came out with those digest books. I don't know if you ever saw them, that were selling Scholastic. They were selling 100 to 120,000 copies of those trade paperbacks every month. Spider-Girl was the best-selling trade paperback that Marvel had.
Okay, so my wife is a kindergarten teacher, and Scholastic book fairs are king at her school. She even gets excited when the book fair comes to the school. That's how awesome they are.
They were great.
Yeah, so Spider-Girl may very well have been so many, I have two girls. It very well may have been some little girl's first exposure to superheroes and first exposure to the medium. You might have instilled a love for comics to so many people just through that character. I mean, it sold well enough through that. What do you think? What about it is the hook? What do you think hooked people?
I think it was just because it was a family soap opera. It was just a family soap opera. We went out of our way to make sure that, that we had a supporting cast, that everybody in the supporting cast related to our main character, Mayday, in some way, shape, or form, in a very specific way, and that everybody in the supporting cast had their own story going on. So it was just this giant soap opera. It was a big web of soap opera. And, the stories were all pretty much one-issue stories, but the soap opera hooked people in. And I think that to me has always been the magic of Marvel comic books. When people talk about, Stan Lee, what did Stan Lee do? They always say, he created characters with feet of clay, blah, 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 blah. And all right, some of that is true. But what Stan really did, Stan's major contribution to comic book writing was he created soap opera. He brought soap opera to comics so that we cared about what was happening to Peter Parker. Is he going to get a date for the prom? What's going to happen to him? What's going to happen to the Thing? Is his girlfriend going to accept him? Is she going to reject him? It was the soap opera that hooked us into all of these characters. That, to me, is Stan's greatest contribution.
So you were at Marvel in the 70s. I'm assuming he was already out west when you started there, correct?
Pretty much, yeah.
Did you ever run into him, or was it?
Oh, yeah.
He a pretty good guy, or was it
He was a great guy. At one point, I was assigned to be Stan's liaison with Marvel Comics, so I got to speak to him at least once a week. And Stan was a fabulous guy. He, the character of Stan Lee, that hate true believer, that was the real Stan Lee. That was Stan. All right, he would quiet down a bit, when the cameras were off, but he was a real caring person. When you look at the characters in Amazing Spider-Man, I could see, Stan Lee is Peter Parker. He is just as insecure as Peter Parker. Stan Lee is J. Jonah Jameson. He's grouchy. He's cheap. He's boisterous. Stan Lee is Aunt May. He's very concerned about, are you dressed warmly enough? Constantly when Stan and I would go out, he'd look and go, is that jacket warm enough for you, Tommy? Did you bring an umbrella? It's raining outside. What are those shoes? They're going to get all wet. That was Stan Lee. He was all of those characters. So many times I look at, I see a character and I see the dialogue the character saying, and I'm thinking, I can hear Stan's voice. He really was a great, great guy. Now, I was not there for the beginning of Marvel, so I don't know. I know that people say, "Oh, Jack created everything," or "Stan created everything," and I think no, together they created this stuff. Jack, without Jack's visuals, I don't know if the Marvel Universe would have worked. Without Stan's personality and dialogue, I don't know if the Marvel Universe would have worked. I don't mean to lessen the contributions of, certainly I don't mean to lessen the contributions of Steve Ditko or Don Heck or any of the other guys. I mean, comics are a team sport, and everybody in the team has to be doing their best. And if they are doing their best, you get a great comic book. I think everybody was doing their best in the early days of Marvel, or certainly trying to do their best.
Is there anyone? I'm sorry. Is there anyone?
What? Is there anyone now? What?
That's blowing your hair back that you think is putting out just solid comics?
I'm not really up to date on a lot of the current comic books that come out. They're not made for a guy like me. The pacing is different from what the kind of stuff that I find it interesting. So, like I say, I'm just not paying too much attention to the current comics. It would be unfair for me to say, hey, I like a lot of the guys, but I'm really not paying that much attention to the medium at this stage.
I hear you. And I mean, it's one thing that's awesome about the medium itself is it's ever changing. There's always new evolutions in the medium. So
it should ever be thus. I think that anybody doing comic books that would appeal to me, that's a dying audience. What are you wasting your time for? You got to be doing comic books that appeal to today's marketplace. And, so
what are you reading?
Things outside of comics.
Yeah. But is there anything that's blowing your hair back that we need to know about?
Well, I just finished a Private Cathedral by James Lee Burke. I thought that was a terrific novel. Let's see. Fabian Nicieza has his first novel coming out. I'm waiting to read that.
He actually talked about that on the show, and it sounded fantastic.
Well, good old Fabian. He went out and he wrote New Warriors and did a better job than I am, than I could have. And I've never forgiven him for that. That's an outrage. I love that book that he and Bagley did. He shouldn't have done. He shouldn't have written better than I couldn't. That's unfair.
It's a fantastic book. One thing I love about hearing you talk is that you are the consummate team player, and you will not waste a chance to talk somebody up who is in the field and cheerlead what is being put out by other people. And that's, I want to see more of that in the world. It's been fantastic talking to you.
So thank you very much, Casey. It's, it's nice to be heard every once in a while.
Tom DeFalco, thank you so much. I thought that you only existed in cartoon form for a good 10 years of my life. So it's nice actually talking to the man. And so thank you again, Tom.
It's my pleasure, sir.
Have a good evening, and we'll get this up soon.
Sounds good.
All right.
You keep the faith.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Will do.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Spaghetti! And we're back.
That's right. We are back. Back in the saddle again. Well, I hope you guys really, really enjoyed that as much as we did making it for you. And if you like what you heard and you want to hear more, you got to go check out spoilerverse.com, because at spoilerverse.com, we have a plethora, amazing directors and artists of all walks of life, and editors and writers, and oh my God, are you a lover of comic books like we are? Then there's so many amazing people from the comic book world over at spoilerverse.com, and I highly implore you to go there and check it out.
Yeah, and while you're there, you can check out all the other podcasts on our network, like Bridges and Geekdoms and Funny Book Forensics and Haphazard Adventures and Nerds from the Crypt and so many more.
Misery
we put out
Point Radio.
episodes all the time. Go check all of them out, and check out all of the reviews and previews and articles we have going up every single day for you, every day on spoilerverse.com for you to check out and to read and to love and to like and to comment. We have a store link. You want to help support the site? You can do it two ways. One, go to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/spoilercountry, or go to our store link in the middle of the site there and get a t-shirt, a face mask, a hoodie, something, look fly as hell, and help support the site when you do that, because we get $1 or $2. And, maybe you want to talk to us. If you do, you can do it obviously on all the socials, but if you go to scpod.us/discord, you can join our public Discord server and come and chat with us all day long.
I couldn't say it better myself, dude.
There you go.
You just mouthed out a ton of information at once, and really, I hope you guys enjoy what you're hearing, because we're working our butts off to bring it to you.
We are.
I guess there's only one left thing. Yeah, I'm gonna go with it. There's only one left thing left to do.
What's that?
In oceans of podcasts,
We are Cthulhu.
as Cthulhu compels you to
Spaghetti. Open the mind.
and read more.
Spaghetti.
Monsters are everywhere. They always have been. They lurk, hidden in every shadow. Behind every dark thought. They are probably in your closet, possessing your friends. And they're almost certainly creeping behind you now. They are most often undetectable. And when they're not, it's too late. Throughout time, these monsters have feasted on society, both physically and metaphysically. The chaos they bring fuels a great dark spirit that seeks to end the world with pain and torment. The Ainz are our only hope. The Ainz family has been cursed since before recorded history to detect the presence of these monsters. It is their bound duty to stop these creatures from destroying humanity through any means necessary, be it by sword, spell, or other. Though the Ainz can feel when the creatures are in close proximity, the monsters themselves are also drawn toward the family. But not everything is as it seems. And although the war between the monsters and the Ainz has waged for centuries, the black and white battle lines have grayed over the years. Not all monsters may be considered evil. Not all Ainz are as righteous as one would think. These are the tales of the Ainz family. Visit AinzAnthology.com to find out